Now, President Bola Tinubu has congratulated President-elect John Dramani Mahama on his victory in the December 7 general election in Ghana following his opponent's concession speech. In a telephone call to Mahama, President Tinubu hoped that Mahama's ascension to power for the second time will further bring stability to the economic community of West African states, of which President Tinubu is the chairman. And President Tinubu commended the people of Ghana for their commitment to democracy, which was demonstrated through the peaceful and successful conduct of both the presidential and parliamentary elections. He applauded Ghanaians for demonstrating again to the world that democracy is the preferred path to achieving political stability, economic development, social justice, and transparent governance in Africa. He affirmed that Nigerians and the regions believe in the principles of the people's right to choose their leaders freely will remain a source of pride. The Nigerian leader applauded the candidate of the governing New Patriotic Party, the Vice President of Ghana, Dr. Mahamudu Bawumia, for conceding defeat before the official announcement by Ghana's Electoral Commission. President Tinubu said Bawumia's stance reinforced Ghana's democratic ethos. And now let's get to the conversation now. Of course, in this chat is a rice analyst, Frank Tietie, and of course the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, Samson Itodo. Both of them, of course, who will be joining us this night to assess the election process in Ghana. But let's start from the studio here. Thank you, Frank, for joining us. Let's start. What were your initial reactions, or will I say thoughts, and how significant is this? Just to land on the question, how significant is this for Ghana's democracy?
Oh, well, I think it's very good. Yeah, John Mahama has recorded quite a number of firsts. Ghana has now shown itself as a fantastic example of how democratic transition can take place seamlessly, because it has the fortune of statesmen that understand that in the tradition that which former President Goodluck Jonathan of Nigeria established, that the his ambition cannot be greater than that of the larger interest of the country. So when you find Bawumia making that kind of statement that there is no, given the fact that tensions were already rising as a result of disputations about the results, he had to quickly concede defeat, even when the Electoral Commission of Ghana hasn't actually concluded its counting of the votes. So I think it's a new dawn for West Africa, for Africa, to see that democracy is now coming to stay with such kind of example. Nigeria is struggling, and to think that our English-speaking Ghanaian neighbors are doing very well, setting the example that one day, somehow, we will have stable democracy, stable and steady transition of power from one party to the other. In this case, something I thought I was going to answer the first part of your question first. What I felt is that this is a comeback season, considering that presidents like former President Donald Trump, now president-elect, had promised he was going to come back, and he came back in such a dramatic terms. And who ever thought that John Mahama, even though he struggled twice and lost, and here he is another big comeback. And both issues, you know, both presidential comeback noted with dissatisfaction with the economic situations in those countries.
Well, of course, quite a lot of people have described this as a historic, comeback for, John Mahama. But particularly for the party, it seems they put in a lot of work, and people are saying, what does this mean? Not only for the democracy in the country, but of course for the NDC party, that's of course the National Democratic Congress, moving forward for the country.
You see, sometimes it's not as a result of the hard work of the party, but it's just an expression of what democracy is all about. That is, the people actually are the ultimate deciders of who should control the government. Now, in this case, when there is dissatisfaction, sometimes what the people just want is the option, just a change. And that's what actually the fortune the APC enjoyed when it trounced the PDP in Nigeria. And I think that's what the NDC also had enjoyed, because it's not very easy to dislodge a ruling party, and to also think that the ruling party will employ all forms of privileges of being the incumbent, having an incumbent president, to ensure that it maintains power. When the people rise up, it is an expression of deep dissatisfaction. But one and most important thing is that this has solidified the electoral integrity of Ghana. And it has its foundation in Aforigyang, Kwado Aforigyang's, the pioneer chairman of the Electoral Commission of Ghana, who was in office between 1993 when it was established. It was a pioneer, and 2015. There is something about that long stay of persons with integrity manning elections. And then the two other women that have succeeded him have also shown that they have unblemished records in terms of managing elections. So when opposition parties, especially a ruling party that contributed to appointing the manager of the election, that is the the chairman of the Ghana Electoral Commission, now accepts defeat, concedes defeat even before the election is concluded, it's an indication that integrity is not in shortage in Ghana. And we made the same point when a number of us were canvassing for Mikey Guinea to be retained in INEC in whatever way, because as a resident electoral commissioner for all of those years, I think about 10 years, where he exhibited the face of integrity in INEC, one would have thought that one way or the other, let us have some institutional memory, let us have some institutional record of integrity remaining in our own INEC. Unfortunately, part of the problems we have had back here in Nigeria, where we have these contending forces who have always attacked INEC as having been short of integrity, is as a result of lack of persons in
I asked that question earlier, just to put in there that perhaps it's not only enough for people to be dissatisfied.
Yes.
It's also good enough to sell yourself. John Mahama has tasted power before. Perhaps they've seen his track record on what he could do. But having said that, quite a lot of people say a big challenge for John Mahama, because he has promised to reset Ghana's economy with inflation above 21%. You have debt restructuring process nearing about 13 billion, of course, dollars, which has been overhauled already. But how do you think he'll be able to pull this through? Because there are quite a lot of expectations right now.
I see a lot of contrast between that this opportunity that John Mahama has with Donald Trump. Having been in power before, they have quite a number of records of mistakes and the idea of things to do when they eventually get power. So I think that it's very appropriate that John Mahama is now approaching it with a mindset of reset. That is, he's going to change things. Whatever it is, governance is always different from many promises, many campaign promises. I hope the Ghanaians don't get disillusioned, but the good thing is that this is democracy. They can easily sack him in 4 years.
But we'll continue in a moment. But let's quickly cross over now and take a look at we have, of course, the Executive Director, Yaga Africa, Samson Itodo, who is in Ghana to observe the election. And thank you for joining us, Samson Itodo. Let's start from, of course, you are on the ground in Ghana observing the election. What are the positive takeaways from the conduct of the poll? Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I guess we'll reconnect back to him as soon as we establish connection. But, give us your take now. We know that election results are yet to be out, all right? And there are quite a lot of expectations. What do you think, John Mahama will address? Because inflation is there. And that's why a lot of Ghanaians are dissatisfied with the current economic situation in the country at the moment. What are the challenges you foresee for John Mahama?
I think that first and foremost, with his challenges are going to be reduced when considering that the tensions that would have posed a bigger problem to him regarding the need for him to pursue the unity of the country, because that's what usually happens after a deeply contested, a widely divided and deeply contested election that they just had. But to think that Mahama has considered election, so he now has that kind of support. What one will expect is that he needs to look at, some form of regional cooperation. Interestingly, many people think that John Mahama is more Nigerian than Ghanaian, in the sense that having spent much time in Ghana, I mean in Nigeria, you know, some people even thought he had some kind of affiliation with OFA. So, but I am also thinking that, considering that Bola Tinubu is looking at some measure of regional cooperation that would enhance the purpose, the original purpose of the ECOWAS arrangement, where we can see more exports, more exchange in terms of goods, and a reduction of travel restrictions and all that. So why I'm thinking that some form of regional cooperation would enhance this kind of some new measure of economic new light in Ghana.
All right. We'll come back to continue this conversation, but let's quickly take this report as Ghana election brings to mind a new wave of transfer of power in African politics as another opposition leader, John Mahama, delivers crushing defeat on the governing party in the country. A Rise correspondent Tomo Bazwai takes a look at the emerging pattern and the factors responsible.
Opposition leader and former president of Ghana, John Mahama, returns to power in the West African country 7 years after leaving office. His remarkable victory in Ghana's general elections on Saturday significantly marks another transfer of power from the ruling party to the opposition in recent time in African politics. Similar opposition victories have been recorded in Senegal, Mauritius, and Botswana. Political watchers attribute the trend to a number of reasons, major among which is high cost of living, corruption, and a stronger opposition voice. According to political analysts, the pattern is likely to continue in 2025 and could cause trouble for other African leaders whose countries are expected to go into elections in the year. A look at the results of most of the elections in 2024 shows massive defeats for the governing parties, with many of them losing their once tight grip on power. In Botswana, the Botswana Democratic Party, BDP, that has ruled since independence 1966, lost in the October general elections. The governing party, Mauritius, also lost at the polls to the opposition coalition in that country, sweeping nearly all the seats in the country's parliament. The trend started in Senegal, where opposition leader Bassirou Faye rose from prison to overcome the tough obstacles put in his way by Macky Sall in a frantic attempt to avoid defeat. Omo Bazwai, Arise News.
Let's cross over to Ghana, Accra now. Well, of course, we have Executive Director of Yaga Africa, Samson Itodo, who is on ground to observe things. Thank you so much for your time. I was asking you earlier what is your assessment of the entire process? You know that Ghana is often seen as a model for democracy in Africa with such a peaceful transition of power. What does this election tell us about the resilience of democracy in Ghana and its ability to navigate crisis without jeopardizing political stability? Thank you so much for your time. I was asking you earlier what is your assessment of the entire process? You know that Ghana is often seen as a model for democracy in Africa with such a peaceful transition of power. What does this election tell us about the resilience of democracy in Ghana and its ability to navigate crisis without jeopardizing political stability?
Well, thank you very much. Please, can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Go ahead. Hello, Samson. Hello, Samson.
Well, I think the Ghana elections says a lot about the resilience of Ghana's democracy. The credibility of the election is largely attributed to the role that, the democratic institutions do play. First, in the build-up to this election, there was a crisis of confidence on the Electoral Commission. The opposition parties, including civil society, were of the view that the Electoral Commission was not transparent about how it manages some of the processes. There were issues relating to the voters register, and so there were several questions as to the credibility, of the voters register. There were also cases of leaked ballot papers or ballot papers with inconsistent serial numbers. But what is unique about the Ghana situation was that the Electoral Commission, was responsive to all the issues raised by the political parties, and it addressed them. And that perhaps was partly responsible for this outcome that we've seen, where the vice president, who was a candidate of the ruling party, conceded defeat at 9:35 a.m. this morning before the final collation of the results actually began. Because in Ghana, there are 4 levels of collation like Nigeria. So from the polling unit, it goes to the constituencies, from the constituencies to the regional, and the regional to the national. And this act de-escalated tension, because I tell you, as at yesterday up till this morning, there was palpable tension across the country because of the collation of results. There were cases of violence, even up till this afternoon, where some offices, at least in 1 or 2 locations, where there had been vandalization of the Electoral Commission's properties, including results and election materials. And so this is a big lesson, for the continent. Yes, the Electoral Commission has not declared all the results. There were issues with the fax machine which delayed the collation. And so the attacks at the constituency level also has prevented the Electoral Commission from proceeding or fast-tracking the process of collation. So we are all expectant and waiting to see the final collation and when the final results will be declared and announced. But the turnout for this election is one thing that we need to talk about. And this election recorded, about 16% deficit in turnout compared to 2020, where there was 79% of people, 79% turnout. In this particular case, is somewhere around 63 or 64, which signals a decline. And that could be attributed to several factors. And so when you think about democratic resilience, the Ghana elections so far does present a positive example, and Ghana has and will continue, to uphold its position as a leader of democracy within the sub-region.
I think we'll just have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Executive Director at Yaga Africa, Samson Itodo. We appreciate your time on Newsnight. Well, let's come back to studio now. Frank, this is the first time in Ghana's Fourth Republic we're seeing a former president voted into power. So the question will be, what does this say about the evolving political landscape, not just in Ghana alone, but of course, the voter sentiment towards, leaders, a change of leadership and continuity. And now we are witnessing this in Ghana. Finally, this final question is, what are the lessons here for the African countries, specifically for Nigeria?
Oh, well, whether you like it or not, there's what we call the spirit and tendency of the times. I think Donald Trump's comeback may have had some form of influence in this election. There is this thinking that somehow there must be something that it's psychological, that there's something we are missing in the other man who did not. Because John Mahama recorded quite a number of firsts. He was the first vice president to be sworn in upon the death of a president. And he was also the first incumbent who actually lost in a democratic setting, who actually lost re-election. And now he is also the first president who lost an election and has made this significant comeback. The idea is this: we will need to come back home and give credit to one of our own, Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, who has actually set the tone that for the rest of Africa. Yes, to follow. And if you talk about lessons, I think the lesson is this. If you look at the message that Muhammad Bahuma had sent out, they've now understood that in the politics of the do or die kind of politics that was noted associated with African politics is now gradually fading away, meaning that kind of message, that kind of posture that he has given is that he is probably going to get another comeback himself. I'm talking about Muhammadu Bahuma himself. So what we need to learn is I listened to our own electoral commissioner, INEC chairman, venerating what Nigeria has done. But the truth about it is that he made the point that the Ghanaian politicians have been consistent, remaining in their political parties, maintaining a single ideology. It doesn't matter whether they won or lost elections. So I think coming back home here, we should stop this do-or-die politics, and then we should be ideological politicians, and then seeking to educate our citizens in the civil process, that democracy is not a do-or-die, and that if you didn't win today, possibly tomorrow you can win. I think we should congratulate Ghana. Right now, I can categorically say that because we are in the comeback season, so people like President Goodluck Jonathan may just be nursing the idea that could we just, think of 2027, and then they also there's a possibility that there's a reward for being a person who is considering defeat. It's though, I mean, he was tempted in 2023, and then in 2024, with tensions in the north over tax reform bills, you see his posters already going up in other places, so especially in northern Nigeria. So I think that the civilizing process for Nigerian, West African democracy is now, and I think we're making progress. Congratulations to Ghana. It is now ahead. It's now standing very tall, far ahead of Nigeria in terms of being a fantastic democratic example.
Good place to live here. Thank you so much for your time, Frank Tietie, Rise analyst. Thank you for coming on Newsnight.
My pleasure.